Hi, good morning everyone once again. Okay, we're gonna start today's plenary session. So it's my pleasure to introduce to our plenary speaker today, Wendy Chua, a design researcher, curator, and educator whose work integrates design anthropology, social innovation, and environmental care. She is the program leader for our BA Honours Design for Social Future at LaSalle College of the Arts, where she shapes the next generation of designers to address complex societal challenges. As a co-founder of Forest and Whale, Wendy's work spans product design, service innovation, and museum curation, with exhibition at Milan Triennale Museum, did I pronounce that correctly? Yes, and the Museum of Craft and Design in San Francisco. Her project, recognized with awards such as the President's Design Award Singapore and Good Design Award Japan, explore the intersection of design, climate resilience, and social impact. Currently, she is part of the EU STARTS Resilience Residency, collaborating with marine scientists to investigate the future soundscape of coastal cities amid climate change. Her interdisciplinary approach highlights design's role in shaping more sustainable and inclusive futures. Today, she'll be sharing with us more about her work. So let's put our hands together and welcome Wendy Chua.
Thank you, Lydia. Right, so today I'll be sharing a little bit about my practice, but I'm also an educator here. So if you have any questions about the program that I'm leading in LaSalle, you can come forward as well. The other one. Okay, yeah, so a little bit about me. I'm Wendy. I'm the daughter of a seamstress, also coming from a family of hawkers. Hawkers are the people who cook the food in the hawker centers. So my uncle is still one of these hawkers, and I enjoy hanging out there, eating the meals there. I'm also a design anthropologist. My background is in industrial design, but a couple of years ago, I decided to identify myself as a design anthropologist because of the kind of methodology that I use. Right, and I now see myself as a care advocate. I'm an art science researcher who works at the intersections of disciplines. I'm also an educator for the last 15 years. And now at LaSalle, I am leading a program, the BA Honours Design for Social Futures, which only started in August last year. Right, so it's a very new program. So I think most of you who flew in here, thank you for coming. Most of you who flew in here for the first time might have noticed this from the airplane. Yes, you did. And if you came in at night, you have seen the lights. And if it's your first time seeing this, you'll be like, what is this? Like, what's going on? But actually what you're seeing is a parking lot, right? So it's all these container ships. They are given a spot to park. And if you are living along the east coast of Singapore, you basically look out to the sea view. And I didn't realize this until I traveled to, let's say I go and see the Mediterranean Sea, and I realized that I never saw the sea horizon without it being dotted by ships. So it was really an interesting experience. And why you're saying this is because we have one of the busiest ports in the world, only second to Shanghai, dealing with tonnage that is about four times of Hamburg. Right, so it's quite crazy to think about that, especially because of how small we are, right? And so we started on day one with Dawn's lecture with these two images of the pinnacle of success of Singapore in our nation building effort, with our housing block, housing development blocks that give more than 80% of Singaporeans a roof over their head, as well as our busy port that is one of the reasons why we are such a hub in this region of the world. But today, as a design anthropologist, I kind of want to peel back that polished image and give you a little bit of insight into what lies beneath and some of the issues that we're dealing with on the ground, right? More specifically on elder isolation and coastal precarity, right? And I will do that through two projects that I've been working on for the last 3 years and still ongoing. Takes a while, yeah. And one project is called Head Kopitiam, and the other one is about sensing blues. Right, so I'm gonna dive straight into Head Kopitiam first, which obviously is about how Singapore is an aging society. So by 2026, we will be a super age society, which means that more than 20% of our population will be 65 years and above. Right, so that's going to be a huge healthcare burden for the nation, and what that means is that we have to start preparing for it. Right, how the government has been doing that is to build more and more of these activity daycare centers on the void deck of housing development blocks. So you kind of see this 3 to 4 in every little neighborhood. And they're meant to be day centers that you just drop in and you do all kinds of activity. You can see here, they're playing mahjong and exercises, right? But if you have to look at these two images, do you notice something? Like, where the men, right? It's like, you can count like one there, one here, another one in the background, right? And they're probably there because of their wives. So we were asking that question, like, where are the men and how do we reach out to them? And of course, they're hanging out at the hawker centers, at the coffee shops. And there's a reason why they enjoy this, right? It's so porous, it's ventilated. Nobody tells you when you should come and when you should go. You can leave anytime. It's also a place where you can sit down and tell people about your life stories, humble brag about all your achievements, and there's always a ready audience for it. Probably the wives were tired of hearing the story and they kind of kicked them out, and that's where they're hanging out. And so we realized that if we want to reach out to this big segment of the community that are actually not reached out by the active aging centers, instead of trying to convince them to enter the centers of care, we need to hack these spaces that they're at and bring care towards them, right? So how can we redesign the notion of care? And so that's how we started this project about active aging beyond walls, which is literally working outside the center and entering the community space, which is actually most of where the community is, that's actually not being served by the active aging centers. And we did this through this project about hack kopitiam with, here is our playbook for our stakeholders. And really it's a project about social care research. It was led by Forest and Whale, my practice, and a private foundation, Lian Foundation. And it's a strategic care framework that activates these coffee shops as an inclusive model of community care and brings stakeholders that are usually not associated with care into the space, such as the managers of the coffee shop, the runners, the hawkers, the social workers, together with socially engaged designers and artists, working together so that we all see ourselves as care advocates within the community space to reduce elder isolation. Right, and this is really what we're trying to intervene, right? Social isolation for seniors who are living alone, maybe they didn't marry, maybe they're widowed, but at some point in time when they are disabled by their aging, they get trapped at home and all they can access would then be social services that have to come knocking on their doors. But what we hope to intervene is to go before this, is to be able to reach out to them before they get to the isolated stage, yeah. Which is what we call the pre-loneliness phase. Right, when they're still able to walk to the coffee shop space, and this is Mr. Huang, he's more than 90 years old, and every day he'll walk down to a coffee shop at about 3-4 p.m. and that's probably the only fitness ritual he gets. And we thought about how can we hack the table space in a 3-hour session to work with him, and we found out through life story sketching, which is one of the methods that we use, that he was a teacher of calligraphy and languages, and so we hacked the table space and make it as professional as possible, so that all he has to do is to lift up the brush and start writing. Right, and of course as he's writing, you can see here the student volunteer is putting out the correctors for him because we realized he was missing strokes and he was forgetting how to write. And that's fine, like it's not about having the perfect calligraphy, but it is about being able to practice in the space that he's hanging out every day. Right, and it's also not important how perfect that calligraphy is because what we see ourselves doing is that we are bridging connections between neighbors, right, in such an activity. So that two seniors who might walk by each other every day but doesn't say hi would actually be able to connect over a common interest. Yeah, so we created a playbook about how do we start a coffee shop, how do we sight sense where is the right coffee shop to intervene, and how do we kickstart it through life story sketching, through various activities like stone stacking, mapping rituals, calligraphy, and so on. And we planned out an entire roadmap of how we can enter the space, but also how can we exit the space, right? So across the weeks, what are the activities that we bring in? How do we taper off our engagement so that we don't let them feel that the space is empty because now we're no longer there, right? And in our pilot sort of social experiment, across 13 weeks, we found that we could reach out to more than 50 over residents across 3 hourly sessions every week. And out of this, 85% of them are male. And we managed to give sketches to most of them, like 50 of these sketches. So what we actually tell them is that we are here to do a social arts project. We want to know about your life story. And in return, we're going to gift you a sketch. Right, and many of them gifted us back free coffees and all that. So it was a really lovely exchange that flips the idea that usually community-based workers here tend to have. Like they tend to do free gifts for the community so that they will come. But we were very clear that we wanted to start off without providing free gifts, right? But we provided that free sketch. Yeah, so one interesting thing that we learned about this project is that Het Kopitiam is transboundary. Right, when we activate a coffee shop, we meet people who comes in from other precincts. So we are at Ang Mo Kio, we'll meet someone that come in from Punggol or Hougang or Woodlands, which is about 20 to 30 minutes coming in via bus. And the reason why they come in is because they grew up in this precinct, and then 15 years ago, they moved out of it. But they continue to travel in every day because this is where all their friends are at. And if you ask them, why don't you go to the coffee shop at Punggol? They will be like, yeah, but it's not the same. They don't have the same food, or they don't have the same people, or the atmosphere is different. But really, at the end of the day, it's just that they are very familiar with this area. And that's interesting because if you look at social care services, they have boundaries, and they're defined by precincts, which means that if there's a social care agency that is in Ang Mo Kio, they will not be funded for a person that they're serving that's coming from Punggol. Right, and this kind of funding mechanism actually defines the way they function. Yeah. So what we also learned is that this explains a little bit to us how elder isolation happens. Right? People are not they're not social hermits to begin with. They all have friends, right? But just that the friends are not in the location that they're at right now. So the moment they are no longer able to travel that distance to meet their friends in other neighborhoods, and they're trapped in their own neighborhoods, that's when they are existing in the gaps of their social networks, right? And that's how they become isolated. So what we do at Het Kopitiam is what we call asset-based community development, based off Cormac Russell's work. And we would map out who are these elders across the neighborhood and what are the kind of gifts that they have, the kind of assets in this community. And across all these pilot projects, we managed to map out various types of gifts and skills that we can tap into, that we can transform into various types of community activities, right? Things like even caregiving as a gift, right? Or a taxi driver who is able to give a ride to someone who needs it. And so we see ourselves seeding sort of this wild garden of community care, where we found these many hidden gifts of what people have and how we can transform them into tangible interactions in the community. Right, so somebody who have knowledge of lesser-known walking path could be a leader in creating a walking group to share these walking paths to other elders. Or a senior who is actually a cast net fisherman and owns a boat at the jetty, he can have a coded invite for a weekend fresh fish market. You just have to go to the jetty, tell the people which boat you're at, and you find him and he passes you his catch of the day. And also this project really transforms our idea of what is aging, right? Because Mr. Su is 70 now? Yeah. He started stretching himself at the age of 50 plus, but somehow he get to this level that none of us can do it. Even our 18-year-old student volunteers can't do this. Yeah. So what we realize is that we're not designing for aging society, we're designing for ageless society, and that difference is extremely important. We don't go in trying to define what they should be, right? And I think that is the critical departure that we took from the social care service workers and professionals, is that we don't go in asking, can we help you? We go in asking, can you help us, right? Or rather, can you contribute? And this is really, really important because when your eyes are looking for weaknesses, you can't see strengths, right? So we had to keep reminding our volunteers and the people that's on the project that we are looking for strengths, we're not looking for weaknesses. Even if he looks a bit weak, maybe he's showing signs of dementia, but look, he can write calligraphy, let's focus on that. right? And that sense of agency and empowerment is extremely important. Right, so in this project, we saw that we were making a few key strategic shifts away from how social care organizations usually work. Right, in these centers that I showed you in the beginning, they tend to be organization-led, but in our case, we are community-led. They are inside the center, we are beyond the center, they are needs-based, we are strength-focused, they are curated programs for seniors, we are co-developed program with seniors based on the kind of needs that we see. They are designed around services with referral. They're trying to refer you to certain services that you may need, but we are not trying to sell them a service. We're trying to allow them to age with agency so that they have some control over their aging process. And with the centers, you might feel that the organization cares for you, but in our case, we hope that they can feel that the village cares for you, right? And oftentimes when we talk about seniors who pass away at home and nobody knows after a week, it's interestingly, if they've been going to the coffee shop people are the first one to notice that the guy has not been coming down for coffee. Please go and check what's going on. So with the group of uncles that I hang out with the other day, in the picture, they often tell me that they're just sitting there waiting for the final barbecue, which is basically a crematorium. And they would also say that, so they make jokes about this, which is so funny, right? And then they will also say that, if someone is not appearing today, we'll go downstairs to the void deck and see if there's a funeral there. So they are caring for one another in their own way. But it doesn't mean that we see ourselves different from the social care agencies. Neither are we saying that we are doing their job better than them. It's really important that we work with them. Right, so this Hack Kopitiam was really about pulling in all the various stakeholders, including the Member of Parliament, the MP of the neighborhood, when we realized how important it was to leave behind legacies of the work that we're doing. So when we wanted to paint this mural, and it's really nice that our volunteer is holding a paintbrush and the uncle is holding his ping pong racket. We had to reach out to the town council person that controls what kind of public spaces we can use. And he was really supportive of this project because he talks about the kind of struggles he had to deal with whenever active aging centers are going to be built in a void deck space. They had to negotiate for the use of that space with the residents because the void deck space is a very prime space that's used for Malay weddings, funerals, and many other community events. And there are many people who don't want an active aging center downstairs of their home, right? They think that, it's just, this is great, but not in my backyard, right? So it is highly contested. There's limited amount of space in void deck that MP can provide to these social care agencies. And so when he thought, if we can activate coffee shops, and there's so many of them, that would make so much more sense, right, from his point of view. And when we realized that the reason why the social care workers are not coming out of the center is actually because of the way they are funded. They are funded for their headcount to service the center and all the kind of activities they need to run with their key performance indicators. We realized that the only way this project can function, if we want to have continuity, if we want to have partners on the ground that can hold relationships when we leave, is to fund a headcount, right? So we actually got a foundation in our pilot project to fund a part-time headcount of the social care worker to be hang out with us. So we actually have to pay the salary to convince them that you need to be with us in the community space and you need to be there painting with us. So we have uncle, we have our volunteers, the students, and here is Jill, who is working in the Active Aging Center. So throughout that pilot project, she could spend 2 days a week with us in the community space. And she actually could remove herself from all that busyness in the center and just be there painting and observing the surroundings, right, of the community. Right, so, and it's also important for us to make sure that we leave behind activity engagement techniques that they can continue using, such as from a simple stone stacking activity, how do we set it up, how do we make sure that it is attractive to the senior, yet competitive, yet they have their own space to stack so they don't start stealing stones from one another, which can happen when they are very competitive. And because we have seniors who can stack for 3 hours straight, and they are like 11 stones, and they're really they really see this as a sport. And ultimately, and that's Mr. Fu whom I'm talking about, and ultimately also leaving the project with elders who are ready to volunteer with the Active Aging Center. So after the pilot of, I would say about 2 months, Mr. Fu would be carrying all our props for us, right, as we move from one side to another, because sometimes we had to vacate the coffee shop space when it gets too busy. And there he is helping us, and then he will sit down, and amidst all that chaos, he's stacking stones for 3 hours. It's really incredible to watch. Yeah, so, and I want to show you a video of how it's like. And every time I see this, it really moves me. The quote that is written on jail shirts here from Montfort Care, who is our social service partner, says, "Those whom the world rejects must move you the most." Right, and this is Corrit. He's not the usual person that these centers like to engage with, right? Because it's like 11 a.m. and he has a plastic bottle inside beer. He starts drinking really early. Yeah, so he may not be always so sociable, but with us, it's different. And Mr. Fu is still stacking stones, yeah? Yeah, so audition student volunteers, they must be able to dance. But it's really nice to see how usually these elders may not interact, it's really interesting how these kind of encounters can happen when the moment you step out of the center. Just a grandma that is passing by with her foreign domestic helper, caregiver, pushing through and then decided to stop and play the music, and then she would just suddenly stand up and start walking towards us, and we were kind of like fearful, but then it just shows the amount of agency you can still have at that age. And Corrit being able to play that guitar for her, I think is very, very empowering. Yeah, and of course, as an educator, I try to bring that back into the classroom. So these are our students from the Design for Social Futures program, doing that engagement with the seniors. And here they're mapping out rituals to find out where they hang out the most and where are the hotspots in the community spaces. Yeah, so in this Hack Kopitiam framework, the student volunteers are really the foundation for such a project. And we try to create a very scaffolded framework so that they're able to see how they might eventually have a career pathway. So they start as volunteers, and after 9 sessions of training and volunteering, they get into a paid position where they become an intern, a social design intern, and then later on, they can even potentially have a job with a social service agency. So we are here trying to create career pathways for socially engaged designers in non-design sectors, specifically the care sector. But at the same time, we also see ourselves transforming how care looks like in these sectors by bringing in new stakeholders like the coffee shop people, artists, and we're redesigning job roles of these social work professionals as well as policies. Actually, we got policymakers down to hang out with us as well, right? And get them to rethink the way they are designing a policy that is causing people to behave in that way, right? Yeah, and I think it's really about these two intersection, that it's not just about us trying to get into the care space, but also trying to be part of that conversation about what care should be about. Okay, so now I'm gonna jump to the other image, which is about coastal precarity, where we go beyond human and look a bit at what's happening along the coast. So as a designer, I'm drawn to toxicities, especially when they are beautiful. I find that there's some contradiction there. And so Sensing Blooms is an art science research that is diving into all this microcosm of modern human ecosystems within the sea, but specifically into the coastal threat of toxic algae blooms, nourished by anthropogenic waste streams, as well as influenced by marine heat waves. So this is a project I started in 2022, around the same time as Hack Kopitiam, and it was in collaboration with the scientists at the Tropical Marine Science Institute of NUS, National University of Singapore. And that's basically me following in the footsteps of a research assistant who's following the footsteps of a floating fishery farmer with 30 over years of experience. So I started this with the question of how can we make sense of the intangible threats of marine heat waves when they burn like invisible wildfires in the sea, and we see this happening across the world. And so it's like there's something happening in the sea, but we can't really make sense of it, right? And then a couple of months down the road, you get news about 7,000 whales that are beaching on the shores, and they are now tracing it back to the starvations that's caused by the phytoplankton that died in that marine heat wave, right? So it goes to show how these threats are having repercussions without us being aware about it. At the same time, another event that is entangled within this are the more and more frequent algae blooms that was happening in Singapore and many parts of the world. Toxic blooms that are blooming because of great conditions with nutrients flowing in, with waste, but also with marine heat waves that is an influencing factor. And here you have in Sentosa Cove, the pink blooms, another one that is in 2022 is in St. John Island. And what happens with the bloom is that they kill fishes, they have toxicities within it. And back in 2014, we had massive loss of income for the fish farmers, and also it means that our food security is at stake. So every time they see a bloom now, the fish farmers are a little bit nervous, right? It might happen again, right? Is it going to happen again? So they're not sure. Even though in 2022, even though the bloom happened, it didn't lead to massive fish death because it wasn't a very toxic one. But what's interesting about this is that in the day, it looks like this, but at night it looks like this, right? It's incredibly beautiful. It's bioluminescent. So when the scientist says that, look, it's not one of the most toxic species, you could even swim in it, with inverted commas, then locusts flock to the beach, they are frolicking in these waters. And although they don't have toxicities, when they are blooming in this massive scale and they die off, they release a lot of, in this particular species, they release a lot of ammonium into the sea. So they can still influence the ecosystem, right? And so it is this contradiction of sort of like what the threat it brings and the beauty, and not knowing how to behave with that toxicity that is drawing my interest. And what's also really interesting is that it's not even one species blooming. It's actually a symbiotic species that is blooming. So this particular Nautilus scintillans has a host and an endosymbiotic species that lives within it. So what you're seeing is a community that's blooming. And so it brings to mind Lynn Margulis' work on symbiosis, where she writes about, in the arithmetic of life, one is always many, many often make one, and one, when looked at more closely, can be seen to be composed of many. And the idea that even us, we are communities, right, of microbes. So to understand more about this, I had to shadow the scientists in order to deep dive into this topic about harmful algae blooms. So here I am following them out on their research boats where they are dropping these sondes with probes that can capture various types of scientific data. And that's a probe that is dropped into different points along the Johor Strait of Singapore, which is between Singapore and Malaysia, as well as the Singapore Strait between Singapore and Indonesia. And there you can see on the left-hand side of the screen the different types of data they were getting, the pH value, the dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll level, and so on and so forth. So they would drop it to the deepest part, which in this particular case is only 6 meters deep. And they will pull it up slowly to get data every 0.1 meter. So what they get is actually a columnar data of the sea in order to understand the conditions. And they're also getting sea samples from these different sites. And then they measure the saturation threshold of blooms to decide whether it is blooming or not. And it is incredible to me to think with all this technology that it's still such an analog process. So they basically drop 1 ml of the sea sample onto a Sedgwick rafter, which has this grid of 50 squares by 20 squares, so 1,000 squares, and they count the number of cells, right? And if you hit a certain number of cells per ml, you will call it a bloom or not, depending on the species size as well. So that's a kind of sound you hear when they are measuring blooms. It's like this clicking sound. Hey, sorry. Yeah, so I decided that if I was doing this research, shadowing the scientists, I need to be involved in those processes myself. And in Bruno Latour's footsteps, I decided I will reenact certain scientific procedures by conducting my own experiment. So I wanted to know how was the toxic algae species responding to marine heat waves and the kind of temperature spike that you get in the sea. So what I did was to culture a specific species, a Goniella spinifera, at 4 different temperatures, at 4 different temperature spikes, and to see how they perform. And the question I was trying to ask is that, in rising sea temperatures, we're talking about a 2 to 3 degrees shift, which is not a lot by human standard. We can barely sense the difference, right? But can microalgae be our mediating sensors of these precarious climate conditions? And if so, how, right? So that's me trying to conduct my experiments with the scientists guiding me over Zoom, because I was based in Berlin then. And there I have, so 20 degrees was my control. And then I put it into the 4 temperatures, right? So at 20, it is the control, the first box, and then 25, they get a 5-degree hike. 28, they get 8-degree hike, and the last one is 35 degrees Celsius, which you can see is just broken shells. It was almost instant death. And by the way, the algae should be frozen. Actually, I had to freeze it in order to count it, because they're not supposed to be moving, obviously. Otherwise, I'll be counting the same one. But obviously, that one was too alive at the 25 degrees, so no matter how I freeze it, it's still dancing. And I'm supposed to be counting scientifically, but I just keep drawn to the way they are dancing. And then after a while, I'm like, okay, I have to start again. Yeah, but it's really interesting. They all dance differently, by the way, these toxic species, which is also why they survive marine heat waves, because there are different types of phytoplankton. Mainly the 2 big groups are the diatoms and the dinoflagellates. The dinoflagellates are where you find most of the toxic species, and they can swim. So they can swim to cooler waters, right? So you're probably gonna get the good guys killed off by marine heat wave, but the toxic ones will survive. So this is my graph. I'll guide you through it. So the dark blue is the control. The light blue is the 5-degree hike, right, at 25 degree. And you see there's a dip down first, because you got a shock of 5 degree. And then it started going up, and it bloomed even higher than the dark blue, which means that it reached an even more optimum bloom. The green one was at 28, so it had an 8-degree shock, and it was plateauing, and it was a slow death. The yellow one was the 35 degrees, so it's a 15-degree hike, so of course it died immediately. But what's interesting about this graph is that between the light blue and the green, it's only a 3-degree difference between perfect bloom and slow death, right? And I think that was kind of like what I was trying to ask at the very beginning, whether microalgae can be the sensors of these minute differences, and this is what we're seeing. And also, looking at how James Lovelock write about the Gaia theory, we can also think about these algae species as not just adapting to their sea environment, but that they are adapting the sea for their survival as well. Because these microbes, no matter how small they are, when they are blooming at that level, at that massive scale, they can transform the sea's conditions, right? And they are, like all of us, living within a world that is the breath and bones of our ancestors, and that they are now sustaining. So I've taken this project further because we're very fortunate to receive the Resilience Starts residency that gave us the opportunity to field a team together with the VR developers based in Berlin, Joyce, who's a composer, Gustavo is a designer, and we were working on a VR project right now that will launch in Berlin on 7th of May, so if you're in Europe, please join us there. It's part of the Matters of Activity research cluster. And I'll show you a short glimpse of how a bit of the VR experience. Okay, so we wanted to make it so uncomfortable that we hope people will just pull off the VR lens at the end. The soundscape is designed by Joyce to, in response to the attributes of the various microbes. And you see that what we're trying to do is to talk about how marine heat waves will influence species differently. So as the heat wave was coming in, some species were dying off, and some were actually flourishing, right? So as an educator, as I mentioned before, I again try to see how can I involve the students in this process since I built that trust and that relationship with the scientists. So I brought them into the lab just last month, and they all had to get site samples across the edges of Singapore at different coasts. And we brought it in to observe what's inside. And ultimately, they are working on a project about designing speculative probes on the topic of coastal resilience and coastal survivability. But I wanted them to start off being situated at what they can find, right? And it's incredible when they discover things that they would otherwise not see with their naked eye. So like this tiny worm was like 1 mm, you know? And these eggs that we couldn't figure out if they were fish eggs or they were sea snail eggs, but they were just so alive, and it was just a tiny blob, again a 1 mm green blob that we look under the microscope. You have the diatoms and a lot of microplastics on the right-hand side. And so when they see microplastic at that scale and with so much prevalence, they understand really that probably a swim in the sea you're drinking, it's all in your system, right? And what does that really mean? So after working on this project for 2 to 3 years, I think what's interesting is that whenever I'm out on the water on these floating fisheries, I always feel that the people on the fishery, the farmers, are more intuitive to what's coming than we are that's living on the city, right? I mean, you can see there's an altar there, right? To whatever god that the farmer is praying to, they believe that their harvest is dependent on forces of nature, right? And it's kind of out of their hands, right? And I think what I've also learned is that when you've designed the conditions for these interdisciplinary conversation, then the role of the designer is no longer just visualizing science, which tends to be the case when you first start a project with people from these disciplines. And ultimately, you want to be able to sit together and ask the hard questions together. And when you can do that, you can also then ask, who are the people that should be part of that conversation? Not just a scientist, but a farmer who has so much to share with us. And in fact, we are conducting science experiment on his farm, as well as an indigenous boat captain who was what you call the Orang Pulau, the island people, and he still plies his trade even though he's moved on to the Singapore main island. He's still plying his trade on the water, and he knows the water way more than us because he spent more than 12 hours a day in the water. And the kind of knowledge that we want to create parallel study, right? So on the left side, you have Bernice, the research scientist, putting in a probe to get dissolved oxygen data. On the right-hand side, you have Mr. Ati, who has been logging what he observed in the water for the last 20 over years. And he has a logbook that even environmental government people would go and take pictures of his logbook because they don't have data that's as far back. And of course, it's very simple logging, right? He writes there, this morning at 12 o'clock, huge winds. This kind of thing. But whenever we are taking the dissolved oxygen data, he will make an educated guess, and he's always very close to the number that we are getting on the meter. So this intuition, right? And also, most importantly, where should these questions and dialogues be situated, right? And in my vision, I think it should be situated on the sea, right? And attend to this view of the land from the sea in order to make sense of what is coming. And so I leave with these two projects that they might seem at first glance very different, but through the lens of design anthropology, actually they are very similar in the way you approach, the way you see with new eyes, and the way you kind of intersect different disciplines. And it's also through these two projects, the kind of lens that I bring into the program that I'm running now, Design for Social Futures, where we look at how can we educate the next generation of designers to look at care-centered social design practices as well as more than human planetary care. All right, so that's all for my presentation today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Wendy. I have an important question. Should I or should I not avoid bioluminescent species in Sentosa?
Don't drink it, don't drink.
Because these species has been, we've seen it in Sentosa over the years, like this couple of years, people are really flocking to Sentosa and like looking for them. I'm one of them, so yeah. Yes, okay, let's open the floor to some question. Any questions?